I've lived alone for most of my adult life. I like the quiet. I like being in control of my space, not having to answer to anyone. But what happened in that little house on the edge of town almost ruined me. It made me question every noise, every shadow, every creak in the night, and sometimes even now. When the wind is still and the neighborhood's asleep, I swear I still hear it. The footsteps on the porch. The house wasn't much. One bedroom, a living room, a small kitchen, and a porch that sagged just enough to make it groan when you stepped on it. It had been cheap, and at the time I needed cheap. So I ignored the peeling paint, the weeds growing wild at the edge of the yard, the way the trees behind it seemed to crowd too close. My friends teased me when I moved in, calling it the haunted shack and axe murderer real estate. I laughed it off. For the first month it was fine, uneventful. I went to work, came home, cooked frozen dinners, binge-watched shows until midnight. It was lonely sometimes, but safe. At least it felt safe at first. It started with the noises. One night I was in bed half asleep when I heard something creak. It wasn't the usual settling of the old place, it was rhythmic, deliberate, step, pause, step. The unmistakable sound of weight pressing down on the wood of the porch steps. I froze, eyes wide in the dark, straining to hear. I lived alone. I had no pets. Nobody should have been out there. Another step. And then silence. I lay there for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for another sound. Nothing came. Eventually, I convinced myself it was a stray animal and drifted into a restless sleep. But deep down, I knew better. The next night, it happened again. I was sitting in the living room this time, lights dim, a movie playing on my laptop, and then, faint but clear, creak. My blood ran cold. I muted the laptop and sat perfectly still. There it was again, the sound of someone slowly climbing the porch steps. I reached for my phone, but before I could dial, it stopped. Whoever or whatever it was hadn't knocked, hadn't rattled the door handle. They just stood there. I couldn't see through the door, but I swear I felt it, the heavy presence of someone on the other side, listening. Minutes passed. My breathing was too loud. My heartbeat was thunder. Finally, I forced myself to peek through the peephole. Nobody. The porch was empty, bathed in faint moonlight. I shut off the lights, locked myself in the bedroom, and tried to sleep. The third night was worse. It was after midnight when the sound woke me. This time it wasn't just a couple of steps, it was the full, deliberate creak of someone walking up onto the porch and stopping at the door. My body went rigid. I stared at the dark outline of the bedroom door, too scared to move. Then I heard it, a slow, dragging scrape, like fingernails trailing across the wood of the door. I clamped a hand over my mouth, heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. The sound went on for what felt like forever, a steady, taunting scratch. And then, silence. When I finally peeked through the peephole, what I saw made my stomach drop. Someone was standing there, not facing the street, not even facing me. They were pressed against the door. Their forehead rested flat against the wood, as if listening. I stumbled back from the door, nearly tripping over myself. And that's when I heard it, a whisper. "I know you're awake. I didn't sleep that night." I sat on the floor of my bedroom, clutching a kitchen knife, eyes locked on the door. Nothing else happened, but the whisper kept replaying in my head until sunrise. The next morning, I checked the porch. Nothing was there. No footprints. No scratches. Nothing to prove I wasn't losing my mind. I called a friend, Jason, and begged him to stay the night. I told him I thought someone was messing with me. He laughed at first, thought I was being paranoid, but finally agreed. That night, with him on the couch and me in my room, I felt safer. Until around 2 a.m. The creak came again. Louder this time, like whoever was out there didn't care if they were heard. Jason sat up on the couch. "Dude," he hissed, "there's someone out there." I came out of the bedroom, knife in hand, and together we crept to the door. The creaking stopped. Through the peephole, nothing. Jason wanted to fling the door open and scare them off. I begged him not to. We argued in hushed whispers until finally, the sound of retreating steps carried off into the night. The next morning, Jason admitted I wasn't imagining it. He swore he heard it clear as day, but that didn't help. It just made it real. For the next week, it became routine. Almost every night, the footsteps returned. Sometimes they stopped at the door. Sometimes they paced the porch. Sometimes there was whispering too faint to make out. I called the police twice. Each time they found nothing. They told me it was probably just a prankster or some local kids messing around. But it wasn't kids, I could feel it. Whoever it was knew me, knew when I was awake, knew when I was watching, and they wanted me to know they were out there. The last night I spent in that house is burned into me. It started the same. The creak of steps, the weight of someone standing at the door. But then, the doorknob turned. I froze, staring at the handle as it rattled, twisted, pushed down. Slowly, deliberately, then came the scratching again. Not just on the door, but along the walls, the windows, the siding, like dozens of fingers dragging across the wood. Circling the house, I panicked, bolted into the bedroom, shoved the dresser against the door, and dialed 911 with shaking hands. The operator stayed on the line with me as I whispered what was happening. She told me to stay calm, that officers were on their way, and then something leaned against the bedroom door. The wood groaned under the weight, the dresser trembling as if someone were pressing against it from the other side. And then, in a voice that made my blood turn to ice, I heard it again. "I know you're awake." The police arrived 15 minutes later. When they came in, the porch was empty. The doors and windows were locked, but the dresser? It had deep, fresh scratches across the side facing the hallway, as if someone had dragged their nails down it while I hid inside. I packed a bag and left that morning. I never went back. To this day, I don't know who or what was on my porch, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I hear it again, step, pause, step, and I remember the voice, "I know you're awake." I used to work late shifts, real late. By the time I clocked out, drove home, and parked, it was usually pushing 3 a.m. The streets would be dead by then. Just long rows of parked cars glowing faintly orange under the tired streetlights. Sometimes I wouldn't see another soul the entire drive home. At first, I liked it. There was a strange peace in knowing the world was asleep while I was awake. It felt like I had the city to myself. But that was before I noticed the car, the one that didn't belong. It was a Tuesday night, I remember, because I'd been covering for a coworker. I pulled onto my street, headlights sweeping over the same neat little line of cars, and then I saw it, a dark sedan. Parked across from my spot, its windows were pitch black. No reflections, no light inside, just pure emptiness. I cut my headlights, sat there for a second, and told myself it was nothing. People parked on my street all the time, but the thing that stuck with me was how clean it looked. Not dusty, not beat up like the other cars, just pristine. I went inside and locked the door, told myself it didn't matter, but that was just night one. The next night it was there again, same spot. At first I thought maybe one of the neighbors had a guest over, or maybe someone new had moved in, but I'd lived there long enough to know every face, every car. This one didn't fit. As I killed the engine, I glanced at it, and I swear I felt it, eyes watching. I couldn't see through the black glass, but I knew. Someone was inside. I hurried to my apartment, locked the door, and sat on the couch for an hour, staring out the blinds. The car didn't move. By the third night, I was paranoid. I drove past my block first just to see if it was there. Sure enough, same car, same spot. I slowed down as I passed. The interior was completely dark, but as my headlights swept over it, I saw something. A faint outline. A head. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat. They didn't flinch, didn't move, just sat there staring straight ahead. I parked, nearly sprinted to my door, and locked it. My heart wouldn't stop racing. I tried to sleep, but I kept picturing that shape. Still, silent, watching. By night 4, I'd had enough. I stayed late at work, hoping it wouldn't be there when I got home. But as I turned onto my street, there it was, waiting. Only this time something was different. It wasn't parked across from me anymore. It was parked directly in front of my building. My chest tightened. I slowed down, headlights brushing over it. The same shape sat in the driver's seat, head tilted slightly toward me. I parked around the corner out of sight and walked the long way to my building. My hand shook as I unlocked the door. From my living room window, I watched it. The car never moved. The figure never shifted. It was like it had been waiting for me. By the 5th night, I couldn't take it. I called the non-emergency police line, explained what was happening. They sent a patrol car. I watched from my window as the cruiser pulled up, spotlight flashing over the sedan, and just like that, it was gone. The car had vanished. The officer circled the block, came to my door, asked a few questions. They said they didn't see any car matching that description. I stood there in disbelief. How could they not have seen it? I'd been watching it all week. The officer shrugged, told me to call again if it came back, then left. I felt crazy. But I wasn't, because the next night it was there again. This time, I didn't go inside. I pulled up across the street and sat there staring at it. The figure in the driver's seat was clearer now. Shoulders, a faint outline of a face. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my hands ached. Then, slowly, the figure turned its head. Not toward the street, not toward the building, toward me. Even though the windows were black, even though I couldn't see their eyes, I felt it. They were looking at me, directly at me. I panicked, gunned the engine, and drove off. I didn't go home that night. For the next 2 nights, I stayed at a friend's place. I didn't tell them why. I couldn't explain it without sounding insane. When I finally worked up the nerve to come home, I told myself I'd been imagining things. That it was just some guy waiting for someone, or a coincidence. But when I pulled onto my street, my stomach dropped. The car wasn't there. For the first time all week, the space was empty. I almost cried with relief. I went inside, took a long shower, and tried to convince myself it was over. But at 3:30 a.m., as I lay in bed drifting off, I heard it, the crunch of gravel outside my window, and the sound of a car door slowly opening. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I stared at the ceiling, praying I was imagining it. Then came footsteps. Slow, deliberate, right outside my window. I slid out of bed, crawled to the corner of the room, and grabbed my phone. My hands shook as I dialed 911, whispering into the receiver that someone was outside my apartment. The operator told me to stay calm, stay on the line, that officers were on their way. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the silence was worse, and then, faintly, I heard it, breathing, right outside the glass. I clamped a hand over my mouth, tears streaming down my face as the sound of slow, heavy breaths fogged the window. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. By the time the police arrived, the street was empty. No car, no footprints, nothing. I moved out a week later, broke the lease, packed my things, and left. I never saw that car again, but sometimes, when I drive home late at night, I feel it. That same cold, heavy stare, and I check my mirrors, half expecting to see it behind me. A dark sedan, engine off, windows black, waiting. I used to love my apartment. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it had charm. Exposed brick in the living room, wide old windows that creaked when the wind blew, and just enough space for me to feel like I was really on my own. It was on the second floor of an old building, one of those pre-war places where the hallways smelled like dust and everyone's doors had more locks than you could count. I thought the second floor was safe. It wasn't too high, but it was high enough to keep out the street noise. High enough that I never worried about anyone getting in through the windows, at least not until that summer. That was the summer I started noticing the latch. It began small. I'd come home from work, drop my keys, kick off my shoes, and head to the bedroom. And there it would be. The window over my bed cracked open just an inch, the latch unhooked. I told myself it was me, that I must have forgotten to lock it the night before, or maybe I hadn't shut it all the way. But it happened again, and again. No matter how careful I was, no matter how tightly I pulled that window shut, I'd come home to find the latch undone. I thought about calling the super, but what was I going to say? That my window latch had a mind of its own? He'd laugh me out of the building, so I ignored it. At first. Then the nights got weird. I started waking up at 3 a.m., heart pounding, convinced I'd heard something. A shuffle, a scrape like fabric against wood. I'd sit up listening hard, but the room would be quiet. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. I bought a little stick, wedged it into the frame so the window couldn't be opened even if the latch was undone. That gave me some peace. But one night I woke up to a sound that still makes my skin crawl. The faintest tap, like a fingernail. Scratching the glass, I froze. My room was dark, but the moonlight spilled just enough for me to see the outline of the window. And there, just for a second, I thought I saw it. A shadow. A hand. Pressed flat against the glass, I blinked and it was gone. The next morning, I told myself it had to be a dream. I even laughed at myself a little. But when I went to close the blinds, my stomach dropped. The stick was on the floor, the window was open, the latch was undone. I didn't touch it. Didn't move. Just stood there staring, every hair on my body standing straight up. That was the first day I truly felt unsafe in my own home. A week later, I came home late from work. The hallway lights flickered as I fumbled with my keys, and for some reason, I felt the need to look behind me. At the end of the hall, near the stairwell, I saw him, a man, tall, thin, leaning against the wall. His clothes looked dirty, his face partly hidden by the shadows, but I'll never forget his smile. Wide, crooked, like he knew something I didn't. I hurried into my apartment, slammed the door and threw the locks. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening. Silence. But when I finally worked up the courage to look through the peephole, he was gone. That night, I barely slept. At around 2:45 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my blinds rattling. I turned slowly, my heart in my throat, and saw the window. It was open, not just an inch this time. Wide. The blinds swayed gently in the summer breeze. I sat frozen in bed, staring. I wanted to move, to run, but I couldn't. I just waited. And then, from the corner of the room, I heard it. A whisper. Too soft to make out the words, but close. So close it felt like it was inside my head. I snapped. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shined it around the room. Nothing. But the window was open, the stick on the floor again, the latch undone. The next morning, I called the police. Told them someone had been trying to break into my apartment. They came, took a report, looked around, no footprints, no signs of forced entry. One of the officers even said, "Second floor? Doesn't make sense. Nobody's climbing up here, but someone was." I knew it. They gave me a pamphlet on home security, told me to get new locks, and left. That night, I pushed a dresser in front of the window. I didn't care if it looked stupid. I just needed to feel safe. But around 3 a.m., I woke to a sound that made my blood run cold. Wood scraping against wood. The dresser. Moving. I didn't breathe. Didn't move. I just stared at the window. The blinds were trembling, and then slowly, the dresser slid forward an inch, another inch. Something was pushing it from the outside. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, whispering into the receiver that someone was in my apartment. The dispatcher told me to stay calm, that officers were on the way. The dresser stopped moving, the blinds settled, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Inside, I ran, bolted out the door barefoot, sprinted down the hall and out onto the street. I didn't stop until I saw the flashing lights of the squad car pulling up. The officers went in, searched every room, every corner. Nobody. But the window, wide open, the dresser shoved aside, and on the glass, clear as day, were smudges, handprints, pressed from the inside. I never went back after that. I broke the lease, left half my stuff behind, and moved into a cramped studio across town. I still think about that apartment sometimes. About the man in the hallway. About the latch that never stayed locked. And about the night I heard the whisper. Because sometimes, late at night in my new place, I swear I still hear it. Soft, low, right next to the glass.